Adam and Eve have just eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And what's happening is you have Jesus, and Jesus is walking in the garden, right? Okay? And he's looking for Adam and Eve. So what's happening is Adam and Eve, and so they're hiding behind the trees. And what's happening is God is walking out and he's looking for them. He knows where they are, but he's relational. He's kind as there is kids. He's like, hey, where'd you go? And so what happens is in Genesis, these guys are having, there's a conversation going on. You all know this, right? So in this conversation, the Lord told me, go and look at when it says Adam and Eve came out of the forest, or out from hiding behind the trees. And I went and looked, it doesn't. And it makes sense that they wouldn't have. So this whole conversation is actually being had while they're hiding in the trees. So God is standing there yelling into a forest, and the forest is yelling back at him, it was the woman you gave me, right? Like, so he wouldn't have come out, because it makes no sense, because they were naked and ashamed, and that hadn't been addressed. So the conversation is going on hidden in these trees. I never saw this before. Besides providing for man in creation, it says God provides covering for them so that they would draw near to him. And that's actually why God provides. That is the original invention of provision beyond creation itself, is actually that they would draw near to him. Is the very reason he provides. So why does God provide for you today? Is the same motivation. And that's why the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, because it's actually an abomination of what he invented it for in the first place. He invented provision that we would draw near to him. But what we use it for is for independence, and then we do what we want. So again, if we want intimacy with Jesus, then what happens is you have to then use, when your bank account is full or whether it's empty, we're drawing near to Jesus. And it is the quickest thing in the world to move you away from intimacy is once you get a bunch of money. Because now you start thinking, oh, I can manage it. I can do all these other things. Where instead, we want to draw near to him and let him direct what we do and involve him in it. And actually, it becomes an excuse to walk with him. When we think about this kind of following Jesus thing, we think about it in a way of getting from point A to point B, right? And we think that's kind of the main focus, right? So you have the end, okay? And then you have the journey to get there, right? And you see this as the means, right? So you have this is typically how people would think, right? Like, we need to get to here, and this is the journey, and that's the means to get there. And the Lord began to speak to me about just his power and his ability and what he could do. And this was kind of the imagery of, like, if there was like a strategy room in heaven, right? So just imagine there's like a bunch of like angelic beings and some crazy eyed thing and, like, you know, all these weird whatever going on in heaven. And they're sitting in a room and they're thinking, how are we going to get the Great Commission done? Like, how are we going to reach everybody on the earth, get them the gospel, give them a appropriate way for them to experience God, and like how we get that done? I just don't think anybody in that meeting was like, hey, I got an idea. Like, what? Like, let's use Joel. Like, he trusts God some of the time. He's a little out of shape. He, complains maybe most or some of the time when we ask him to do stuff. Like, he's slow, all these different things. Like, and they're all just like, yes, like, man, that's a great idea. That's going to really get this thing done efficiently, is let's use that guy, right? I just don't think that meeting ever happened. I don't think that ever took place in some kind of strategy room in heaven. So it's got to be some other reason that God chooses to use us than just to try to get something done efficiently. Doesn't that make sense to you, right? Surely he could just do it himself. Surely he could just send some angelic being who's like perfect and sinless to go accomplish this thing. So the Lord began to show me that actually For Jesus, the journey is the end, and he gives us things to do as a means for the real thing that he wants, which is the journey of obedience. And so often we lose the plot when we're trying to obey Jesus because we think he's just interested in you trying to help him get something done. Like that he couldn't possibly do on his own, right? So it's like, oh, we got to go do this. Like, well, actually, he could actually accomplish that in his own strength and his own might, and he could just do it. But actually, what he longs for is the intimate friendship with you along the way. We see this played out in the temptation of Jesus. So you have Satan tempting Jesus with the end, but without the journey of suffering. And he says, like, here's the nations of the earth which I've been given, which is true, right? Because man gave authority over the earth to the devil when he accepted his lie, right? So he gave him that. So Jesus coming to earth as a man is to restore that authority. And so, because God always means what he says, and when he says to man, I give you dominion, he did. So Satan is basically saying, hey, let me offer you the end without the journey of suffering. And so that's the temptation, because the end really is the end, right? Jesus ruling the nations. But because Jesus knows the Father, and he knows that the journey is what he's all about, he rejects the temptation and says, no, the journey is the delight of the Father, right? Like the interaction that goes on. And so often when we're trying to seek God, we're trying to treat him like some Ouija board or a magic 8-ball, because we think we're just trying to get some piece of information, and we miss the whole thing he wants is the dialogue. I'll give you another fun example. How many of you guys notice that like Jesus seems to like to provide resources in the 11th hour? You guys ever seen that? Like in your time, like he seems to, it's always like last minute. And I saw this as a pattern so often. I was like, Jesus, why do you do that? Not like, why God? That he doesn't respond well to that. But if you're like, why God? Why do you do this? I want to know your ways. I said, God, why are you always doing this like 11th hour thing? And this is what he said to me. He said, you don't pray like you pray in the 11th hour any other time. Like when you don't know where your next meal's coming from, or you don't know how you're going to figure it out, he goes, you pray a lot. And you come to me a lot. And I like that, so I put you in those situations so that you'll talk to me more. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you're messing with me this whole time? And that's why it's always this like last minute things. And I said, so if I just talk to you a lot without that, you'll stop messing with me? He's like, yeah. I'm like, and I tried and it worked. I was like, I can't believe that. So, when we understand his ways, we understand what does he ultimately want? He wants relationship, right? He wants you to be spiritually fervent without having to use money to motivate you to do it, right? Or without these circumstances. This should just be our regular state where we're constantly communing with him. We're fervently praying, whether you have abundance or whether you have lack, you should be fervent in your intimacy with Jesus, right? So stop just waiting for circumstances to dictate your walk with God and step into the journey of obedience, right? So what this provokes us to do is to not just ask the what, but we ask the how, the when, the where, the who, which is really important, that we're supposed to partner with to get this done. So what it does is this should lead you towards seeking him in detail and involving and obeying him in detail to actually see the fulfillment of his promise. And that is a biblical pattern, right? When you look through the Bible, you see that over and over again. They sought him in detail, they obeyed him in detail, and they saw the fulfillment of his promises. If they sought him in detail, didn't obey in detail, often they don't see it. So for each one of us, this should be the pattern of our life, where we're seeking him in detail, we're obeying him in detail, and you're going to see, as you do that, his promises come through And many people get discouraged when God says to them something, and then they go off and do it their own way, and then it doesn't come to pass, and then they blame God, which is a really bad deal. Right? It's like, out of anyone in the situation who messed it up, it's not God. I promise you. Like, he's not the guy that messed up the situation. It's like, well, God said this and it didn't happen. I guarantee you it's not his fault. Like 100%. Okay, someone else did something. And so we want to move away from, like I said, it's just God says he wants to do something, and then you're like, all right, I'm good, and then you leave him to go get it done. Does that make sense? So it shifts our focus to where now we're like, okay, we're going to do this together. We're going to draw near. So in any situation where you're going through something good, you're going through something bad, whatever, his desire and his question is, will you draw near to me? Right? And it's so often we do things that are like, well, especially when it comes to money, it is unusual to have a bank full of money and to be drawing near to him and how to use it, right? So often when we have money, we move to independence, right? That's kind of the way we would associate finance. You're going to get money so that you can be independent, but actually in the kingdom, the more money, the more dependent you need to become. And that's actually why he invented it in the first place, was actually for intimacy.